So, you've been elected President of the United States. Congratulations! But if you're thinking of starting a war, making up your own laws, or even cracking a window anytime soon, it won't be as easy as you may think. The President of the United States is also the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, with sole authority to authorize use of the nation's nuclear arsenal. The President is also responsible for a great deal of military decision-making, including signing off on highly sensitive operations. President Barack Obama, for example, was intimately involved in coordinating the raid on Osama bin Laden's Pakistan compound, which led to the terror leader's death in a shootout with SEAL Team 6 operatives.
And on nights like this one, we can say to those families who have lost loved ones to al-Qaeda's terror, justice has been done.
However, despite their position at the top of the military hierarchy, the president cannot declare war outright. Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution states that, officially, the power to declare war lies with Congress. This rule isn't always followed, though. Presidents have occasionally sought congressional approval for military operations, such as President George W. Bush in the aftermath of the 9/11 terror attacks. But the truth is that military force has often been used without congressional approval, and debate continues as to how the so-called Declare War Clause ought to be interpreted in the modern age. The Secret Service was founded in 1865 by the U.S. Treasury Department, initially to combat the counterfeiting of U.S. currency. As the decades passed, the service's responsibilities evolved, and since 1901, it has been the primary protection force for U.S. presidents, presidential candidates, ex-presidents, and their families. It is therefore considered a major scandal when the Secret Service is seen to fail.
After the departure of Secret Service's former director, Kimberly Cheeto, new leadership has taken responsibility for failures.
The Secret Service's responsibility for providing presidential security was established after the assassination of President William McKinley, and as recent history has demonstrated, this line of defense remains necessary even today. Nevertheless, being constantly surrounded by armed Secret Service personnel takes its toll on the first family, especially when it comes to their sense of privacy. Unfortunately, Secret Service protection is mandatory, with presidents and their families legally bound to be protected by agents at all times. Since the early Roman Empire, poisoning has been used as a discreet method of assassinating those in power. And while death-dealing technology has advanced through the centuries, everyone still has to eat, and poisoning represents a continued security risk in the 21st century. There are therefore several security procedures that ensure the sitting president, their family, and top White House officials consume food prepared in a secure environment by trusted chefs. At the White House, chefs and staff are given a special security clearance, which means that, once vetted, they are allowed to carry on their work in the kitchen without oversight by the Secret Service. Outside Washington, responsibility for ensuring presidential meals are safe and untampered with falls to whatever body is overseeing security as a whole. At Camp David, for instance, meal security is provided by the U.S. Navy, with Navy chefs preparing the president's meals. It has even been reported that, in foreign territories and insecure locations, screeners are employed to monitor how food is prepared and supposedly to taste food for safety when necessary, though reports of their use remain anecdotal. It was once said that President Barack Obama offended Republican senators by refusing to eat a lobster salad at lunch, as there was no screener on hand to verify that it was 100% safe. For many, one of the major perks of success is being able to afford a nice car. But while the highest political office in the US definitely has some upsides, gearhead presidents are likely to be left frustrated by their job. That's because presidents are banned from getting behind the wheel under almost any circumstances. It may seem like a harsh rule, but there's a good reason for it. During a president's administration, they are protected at all times by Secret Service personnel, whose job it is to be the last line of defense for the president in case of attack. Such agents are specially trained in evasive driving maneuvers, which are intended to do just one thing:
safely get the protectee out of the area where the kill zone, if you will, and to move them to a safe location.
To allow a president who does not have that training to drive themselves around would represent an unnecessary security lapse. As such, a Secret Service agent remains behind the wheel at all times. The Secret Service is known to be especially strict when it comes to securing the safety of the president and the first family, sometimes to the point at which their precautions may sound ridiculous. One such precaution is the Secret Service's strict window policy, which requires that the first family refrain from opening windows in the White House while they are resident, or from doing so when traveling by car. The The reasoning for this is fairly obvious. When you think about it, most windows at the White House and those used on official vehicles are bulletproof, and so it could pose a serious risk for someone to leave them open. This is a rule that has taken its toll on presidential families, however. Michelle Obama even made reference to it during an appearance on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert back in 2015. When asked what she was looking forward to once her husband left office, she replied,
"I also want to do little things like, open a window."
One of the primary functions of the presidency is diplomatic, with the president, their family, and close aides often meeting with foreign leaders and other figures to further the country's political interests. Many such meetings involve an exchange of gifts. On the world stage, giving gifts is largely symbolic, and gifts over a certain value are considered gifts to the people of the nation. Smaller gifts, and those given by non-governmental bodies or private citizens, may be retained by the president and their family as long as they are recorded in a transparent manner. In some cases, presidents are also expected to pay taxes on the gifts they receive. The first family can wind up receiving thousands of gifts from members of the general public too, though many, including portions of food, fragrances, and cosmetics, are destroyed by the Secret Service for safety reasons. Presidents have occasionally found themselves in trouble for breaking these rules. According to a Republican congressional investigation, Bill and Hillary Clinton failed to declare roughly $1 million of gifts from prominent figures and supporters. In some cases, the items were immediately donated to the presidential library, so the Clintons were not required to report them. However, it was also alleged that the Clintons had undervalued many of the gifts, causing a scandal at the time. The couple had also taken the items for themselves upon leaving office, having supposedly believed they were gifts meant for the family rather than the government. In 2014, then President Obama emphasized his willingness to use executive orders to set economic policies.
I've got a pen and I've got a phone.
As phones have become such a crucial part of our society, it's perhaps unsurprising that these devices are often targeted by foreign agents. Security services therefore ask presidents to restrict their phone use to official lines, employ security features on all their devices, and log their calls. This has become more of an issue for presidents over the course of the last 2 decades, as cell phones are now used for more tasks than just making calls. During his first presidency, Donald Trump had insisted on using his personal cell phone, despite concerns voiced by his security staff. It had previously been reported that Trump also declined to switch phones regularly for the sake of security, claiming this precaution was too inconvenient. The President of the United States is the head of state, the head of government, and the head of the executive branch. It is the President who selects members of the cabinet and the heads of all the government's federal agencies. However, when it comes down to it, the United States is a republic, which limits the President's executive power with a system of checks and balances. Arguably, the most illustrative example of this is that, despite wielding immense power, sitting presidents are not able to pass laws unilaterally. Instead, that responsibility lies with Congress, with bills only arriving on the president's desk once they have been voted on. The president then has the chance to veto the bill, though this could be overridden by another congressional vote to force the bill through the Oval Office. If a president leaves a bill unsigned and Congress remains in session, then the bill becomes law automatically 10 days later. However, if there is an adjournment in Congress, an unsigned bill is subject to a pocket veto, meaning it does not become law. All that said, presidents can enact policy via executive orders, but those can be easily overturned by courts or a successor. Though the President of the United States is the most powerful person in the country, there is still a great deal of oversight in place to ensure that they use their position in service of the American people. The Presidential Records Act of 1978, for instance, makes incumbent presidents responsible for managing and maintaining the records of their administration, which are then to be kept by the National Archives and Records Administration. The rule was brought into effect in the wake of the Watergate scandal, in which the Nixon administration attempted to cover up a burglary of the Democratic National Committee headquarters.
And I want to say this to the television audience. People have got to know whether or not their president is a crook.
All documents related to the presidency, excluding purely private correspondence, must be retained, a duty that has posed some problems for presidents. Bill Clinton, for example, recorded a series of tapes during his presidency with the historian Taylor Branch, which Branch later used for a book. The National Archives and Records Administration was then sued by a right-wing organization that claimed the tapes belonged to the nation. It was eventually ruled that a president has the right to decide which records are presidential and which are private. Donald Trump invoked this ruling in his defense when criticized over his removal of classified documents from the White House at the end of his first term. The Federal Reserve System is the engine room of the United States economy, responsible for maintaining financial stability through a range of measures, including setting interest rates, managing the supply of dollars, and acting as a regulator for banks. It is tasked with both growing the economy and controlling inflation, and its decision-making has repercussions for the price of goods and the state of the job market. Notably, the President of the United States has no official power to influence the operations of the Federal Reserve. The head of the institution is the chair, who liaises with the Oval Office and with Congress while enjoying autonomy from both. Though the chair is appointed by the President has no power to fire them once in place. Such autonomy has seen some presidents attempt to influence the Federal Reserve Chair. Richard Nixon, for example, pressured Chair Arthur Burns to lower interest rates for the sake of giving the economy a short-term boost, thus increasing Nixon's chances of re-election. Similarly, the president is not in direct control of government spending. Though the president proposes a budget, Congress holds the power to actually set the federal budget and to decide which spending is mandatory. In the months following a presidential election, news outlets offer seemingly continuous reports as to who is due to serve in the new administration. In such stories, it can appear that the president has carte blanche to appoint whoever they want as their pick for the government's top jobs, but it doesn't work quite like that. The Constitution states that, rather than hiring appointees like employees in a business, the president must nominate them by and with the advice and consent of the Senate. The Constitution thus requires that nominees be approved by a majority of the Senate, which can cause problems for controversial picks. A mechanism exists by which nominations can be pushed through as recess appointments, as the Constitution says that presidents have the power to fill vacancies without approval when the Senate is in recess. Several recent presidents have made use of such a mechanism. However, as recess is called by the Senate itself, a majority of senators could prevent recess to stop an incoming president from appointing controversial picks.